Welcome to the Combat Zone. I'm Joseph, and he's Nick, and cue Nick.
The Combat Zone, where the enemy has only three things to say: abandon ship, bail out, and take cover.
Yeah, and sorry about that, guys. I think we had a little bit of a technical glitch getting started here, but everything seems to be working fine now. Except, Nick, it looks like our live stream to Facebook may not be working exactly well. So, again, the message that we have up on Facebook has been all along that you can go to thecombatzone.ca and listen to it live right there. And you shouldn't have a problem from that point on. And, again, we apologize for that technical difficulty, but we're working diligently to straighten that out and iron out all the bugs. And let me say that, let me start by Nick by saying thank you to all those people who actually sent messages in over the week suggesting a few corrections along the way.
Yes.
And we took a lot of those suggestions, and both format-wise and also technical-wise. So hopefully we'll have all of the bugs ironed out for our next show.
I think we've got pretty much we've killed most of the gremlins. I think we've got them all nailed down about what to say when you're going into a break. Somebody from London, I think it was, sent a note and says, "Tell Nick not to say he's going to the little boys' room at the break." Right. And I decided to say, you know what? Thank you for that. That is advice I will take. So that kind of stuff we'll just leave out of the equation. I wanted to let Joseph kind of kick things off. We've got a ton of things to talk about. At the bottom of the hour, though, before we get to that, I'm bringing on Brian Greenwood, and he is an organizer with an organization called First Annual Canadian Canada Walk for Vets. It's the first annual Canadian walk here in Ottawa. They started it last year in Vancouver, and now there's 8 cities involved: Victoria, Vancouver, Edmonton, Ottawa, Kingston, Fredericton, Halifax, and St. John's. So that's coming up on June 3rd. We'll have him on just after the bottom of the hour to tell us what this is all about, why you should support it, and why, in God's name, they picked me to be the MC. I don't know, but I'm honored to do it. It'll be a lot of fun. I always like to do whatever I can to support the vets.
That's the MC at the Ottawa version, right? But they're doing simultaneous walks all across the country, right?
Yeah, it would be very tough to get me in 8 places at once in one day.
Well, we could try, Nick.
We could, but I don't know. Teleportation hasn't been developed highly enough for me to want to risk it.
And we're not quite there technically yet.
That's right.
to live stream to all of the locations at once.
We'll work on that. That's in the
we could live stream actually to YouTube and then embed a YouTube video into Facebook and kill both of those birds with one stone.
Yeah, we could. That's something maybe we should think about, because they want to make this an annual event. So if you're not doing anything next Sunday, you can go. By the way, well, you know what? I'll save it for. I don't want to take Brian's thunder away, so I'll leave all the Q&A stuff for when he joins us just after 9:30.
Okay, our number to call if you want to join in the conversation is toll-free right across North America, 844-415-2115. That's toll-free anywhere in North America, 844-415-2115. And Nick, I know that we just hate talking about politics in the combat zone.
Oh, of course we do. We just loathe it.
But we just can't avoid talking about the election in Ontario.
Well, whether you live in BC or Newfoundland or any point in between, the truth of the matter is, as much as a lot of regions don't like to hear this, and I don't even like to say it, but Ontario is the largest economy in the country. And what happens here affects everybody else, good or bad. The province that's next in line, of course, would be Alberta, and they have their own issues out there. So there's a lot at stake in this election for the whole country, because if Ontario ever gets a chance to right the ship and get things under control, debt-wise and so on, it's going to have a positive impact all across the country. If we go the other way, God help us, and elect an NDP government, like some polls are suggesting, then we are going to be in more trouble than we can imagine.
Well, and I think that's really what I want to talk about. I want to talk about, the fact that just 4 weeks ago, not only was the Progressive Conservative Party had, not only did they have a healthy lead, they had an overwhelming, commanding lead. And the Abacus poll that was released this morning puts them now at 35% and the NDP at 34%. So running neck and neck. And of course, that's just a general poll. It doesn't take into account seat distribution. So there are some peculiarities that are going to affect.
Those are general numbers.
Whether it's right. But really, what's going on here? How is it that the NDP is surging so much in the polls? Or is it perhaps more accurate to say that the PC party under Doug Ford and his campaign team are bleeding support? And if they are, why?
Well, I think a lot of it, here's one of the things that is not being discussed by any of the pundits, and it just drives me crazy because it's a very important element of this that is being overlooked for who knows what reason. But when Doug Ford folded like a cheap tent in a windstorm and dumped Tanya Granick-Allen for a view she held when she was 19, I mean, if you think about it, he just should have. If I was Doug Ford, I would have walked up to a microphone and said, look, these are from 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Who amongst us has never said anything they come to regret later? We're human beings. We're going to make mistakes. I'm going to stay with her, whether the opposition likes it or not, because the woman has character. She brings with her a lot to the table, and you can forget asking me about it.
Well, I don't even care at what age she said what she said about the fact that the government in Croatia that was talking about adopting certain things with respect to sex education and same-sex marriage, sex education in their schools, that she felt that when she thought about it, it made her, I think the words exactly were, want to vomit.
Yeah.
Passionately expressed, maybe inelegantly expressed.
Yeah.
But I just don't accept that those comments rose to the level of justifying having her turfed as a candidate in Mississauga Centre for the PC party.
Well, the consequence of this, and this happens, you can chart this on a graph if you want. Every time the PC party, whether federally or provincially, dumps the SOCON vote, which is what Tanya represented, okay? And it was, in Brad Trost's case, he was the one that got Andrew Scheer elected, bringing a lot of SOCON votes with him. In case of Doug Ford, it was because of Tanya. He was there. People who voted for Tanya used Doug as their second choice. So he owes his leadership to the SOCON vote. Now, to throw them out has consequences. Imagine what the polls would be like if he hadn't gotten rid of Tanya. And there's no way to know this. Okay, this is just pure speculation. I don't have any crystal ball. I can't read, alternate lines of history. But it's my belief that he would have a 2 or 3 or 4 point lead that he doesn't have now because the SOCONs he threw under the bus when he got rid of Tanya are now saying, screw it. If you won't listen to us, we're not going to vote for you. And when people say, well, where else will they go? You know where they'll go? Nowhere. They'll just stay home and they won't vote.
Well, actually, I can tell you that where a lot of SOCONs go, and this is where a lot of political tacticians make the mistake. They assume that SOCONs are always going to support conservative parties. Mm-hmm. But that's not always the case. In many cases, many SOCONs are actually socially conservative, but they're actually fiscally liberal. In other words, they believe that the government has a role in helping with welfare, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to get into a long laundry list to illustrate the point, but there's this notion that somehow or other conservative governments don't look after the poor. They don't look after disadvantaged people. They're hard-hearted. They're only concerned about low taxes and saving government money. And so what ends up happening, by the way, I don't share those views. I think that you can make a very strong case that true SOCONs, to be socially conservative, you have to be fiscally conservative as well.
I think so,
and
too.
It would be nice to dedicate a whole segment of one of our shows in the future to that concept and have a a broader discussion around it.
Okay, sure.
But the point I'm making right now is that barring having that conversation and having SOCONs themselves understand that, a whole whack of these guys, if you take socially conservative issues off the table, they're going to go back to their default position and they're going to vote for the Liberals, or in this case, I think, NDP, as they did in Alberta, because they perceive the NDP to be better positioned to care for the less fortunate in society. Now, I don't share that view, but if the Doug Ford campaign had taken the time to actually have people in the decision-making chain at the table who aren't just SOCONs, quote-unquote, but who actually have political experience working within those communities and the various networks within those communities, the practical, hands-on experience, they would have been warned off. They would have known that dumping Tanya was a potential electoral disaster for them.
And it's playing out that way. I really believe, and again, when you listen to the talking heads on terrestrial radio or wherever you happen to catch them, they never mention this. They never mention the impact that Brad Trost and the SOCON vote had in the federal PC candidate leadership race. They never mention what happened, what's going to happen to Doug Ford, because he threw away 25 or 30% of his support right off the bat when he dumped Tanya. SOCONs are not few in number. They vote. They're active. They're on the ground. They drive in signs. They go out and they work hard. And you throw not only their vote away, but all the support that it takes to put a candidate in the field away. How do you replace that?
Well, and the other thing is that they just I don't know. I lost my train of thought, but it's really upsetting to me because this was the Conservatives' election to win.
Yes,
and they still could win. I'm not predicting that they're going to lose. I'm not even predicting that they won't have a majority. I think that it's 2 weeks before the
and that's a long time in politics.
It's a long time in politics. So let's see what's going to happen.
Well, it'd be interesting to see if the press holds Andrea Horwath to account for some of the people who are running under her banner the way that they went after Doug Ford over Tanya. I'm looking at a woman right now by the name of Mississauga Centre MP. What the heck doesn't... let me click on the article here. I'm just reading the headline. Let's see. Laura Kamenker. Okay. And she says this: I just wear my peace button on my jacket as always and wait for the collective brainwashing to blow over. She's talking about wearing a poppy on Remembrance Day and how that a poppy is just promotes war and all this stuff. Doesn't understand. This flies in the face of millions of Canadians, not just in Ontario, but across the country. And no one that I know of has ever said to Andrea Horwath, how come you keep her? And there's people worse than her running under that banner. How come we had to get rid of Tanya, who was a very reasonable woman? You might not like her politics, but she was, articulate. She was smart. Had some ideas that were worth chasing down. How to get rid? Well, I don't know about pulling windmills out of the ground with tractors was all that practical, but it made a great soundbite. But the point is, if you're going to get rid of Tanya because of things she said, how can you then turn to the NDP and say nothing about some of the outrageous stuff that gets said under the NDP banner?
Well, I've heard, in fairness, Nick, I've heard some of the media questioning Andrea about that particular candidate, and she's sort of blown it off. But the interesting thing is you'll notice how she's not dumping her candidates. She's standing by them. She's saying, yeah, that's their opinion. It's not mine. I don't share it. It's not the party's position. And I think she understands why it's distasteful to a large majority of voters in Ontario. But the difference is she stands by her candidates.
Yeah, fair enough.
And the point I wanted to make before that I had temporarily lost my train of thought was that if the strategy in the Ford campaign after dumping Tanya and the firestorm that erupted amongst social conservatives as a consequence of that, that they felt that if Doug went out and he said, you can trust me, I'm still going to deal with the Ontario education curriculum, the sex ed component of it, which frankly was a big issue for Tanya and a lot of her supporters. And he still promised that I'm still your guy. I'm still going to deal with that. And there seemed to be, in my view, a very naive expectation that that was going to mollify socially conservative voters, that was going to appease them, that was going to take the edge off of their frustration and anger, and they were going to go, well, we can continue to trust the Ford campaign, we could and Doug Ford. And look, I actually like Doug Ford, and I still think, my personal view is that he still is trustworthy on this. But shortly before dumping Tanya, there was the flip-flop because there was some aggravation and some media pushback on the green belt around Toronto. And then hard on the heels of that is somebody said boo about Tanya. And it wasn't even the media, frankly. It was the Liberals. Surprise, surprise, the Liberals are going to try to demonize conservative candidates.
Like that's never happened before. And
right away, after making a big show of how Tanya, we want Tanya on board. She was a former leadership candidate. You're right. Her supporters largely pushed Doug over the top in the leadership race. After all of that, the Liberals say boo and you dump her. So there are two questions that I have. The first is, how do we really trust that when the heat is on, when you are elected and you do have a majority, that's great, but now you're going to do something about the sex ed curriculum, and you know that the opposition is going to be fierce.
Oh, they're going to scream,
and they're going to be loud, and they're going to scream and kick.
Yep.
So how do we know that you're not going to cave in like a house of cards when that happens, if you're doing it in an election campaign? That's number one. The other thing, I have to ask this question. How is it that you don't know going into an election campaign that Tanya Granick-Allen doesn't have these videos on YouTube? Surely to goodness, like, she had to be vetted.
Yes.
She had to be vetted before she was allowed to run as a leadership candidate.
Right.
She had to be vetted before they allowed her to run as a candidate in a nomination.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of attention paid to her both by the media and, presumably, opposition research by the other leadership campaigns. The point I'm making here is they had to have known about this before, and if they didn't, that's a serious problem. That's somebody, irrespective of political philosophy or outlook, that's somebody who fell down on the job because somebody should have known about this in advance, and they should have been ready to deal with it right away. And there's this myth that's already developed out there that somehow this was a surprise and the Liberals foisted it on, brought it out into the open, and everybody's shocked about it. Well, look, I'll tell you what. If people were genuinely shocked on the Ford campaign by this, Nick, between you, me, and the gatepost,
yep,
and everybody else that's out there listening, so I guess it's not really between you and me and the gatepost, that's a firing offense in a political campaign.
I think so, too. I think that is absolutely horrible support for the leader because, let's face it, if you compare political leadership to the leadership of let's say, a ship, the captain doesn't have to know how to do everything, but he has to have people on board who specialize in each of the departments in that ship, and he has to be able to trust them to give him the right advice to make the right decisions. And if he gets bad information from, let's say, his navigating officer or his engineer officer or the deck officer, whoever it is, and it's, you might forgive it once, but if it happens twice, bye-bye. I'm getting somebody else because it's too important to run this thing effectively than it is for me to keep covering up for you.
And this is what's really troubling me about the PC campaign in Ontario. What's really troubling me is there are huge holes, and I don't want to say that individual people are not competent, but there are clear gaps in the management of the campaign, And these are basic things, Nick. I mean, I've run campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I hate throwing stones at other people, and I know that's what it sounds like. I'm not involved in the Doug Ford campaign. I'm not involved in the PC campaign. Okay? I'm a talking head for this election.
Right.
Right? So I don't like throwing stones. And I know that's what it appears that I'm doing. But look, you got to call them like you see them. And I'm really very concerned that if this is the quality of staff work that's going on around Doug Ford during an election campaign, if he wins, is this the quality of staff work that we're going to have under a Ford government?
What we're looking at is another case, another example of people who are busy snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. And that's what it certainly looks like at this point. Now, as you point out, 2 weeks is a lifetime in politics. I'm waiting on the results of the Nanos poll tomorrow. I think Nick Nanos has probably got the most accurate of all the polls out there. So it'll be interesting to see what he comes up with after Victoria Day long weekend, because he was right when he was talking about people are going to get together. Eventually the conversation is going to turn to politics, and that's when people will cement in their mind who they're going to vote for. And it's going to be very hard to change it after that, because now you've got Doug Ford. People have a certain image of him, and whether it's good or bad, it's going to be very difficult in the last 2 weeks to try to find ways to support that. But if he hadn't thrown his SoCon vote out, it wouldn't matter as much. And so now they're playing like with 2 strikes against them already. And with what I'm terrified of is an Ontario version of the Orange Crush that happened in Quebec. That's what I'm afraid of.
Well, it just happened in Alberta a couple of years ago.
That's why I'm afraid of it, because it's not unique.
Just before we're coming close to a break time, and I can't let the moment pass without also making the observation that, you dump Tanya Granick-Allen, and you keep this wacko candidate in Carleton, who is as far left as you could possibly imagine politically, but she got in on what I think was probably a rigged, one of Patrick Brown's rigged nominations.
You're talking about Goldie Gamari?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is somebody who's talked about in the most deprecating, derogatory terms about Christianity, about Christians, about Christmas, about Jesus. Really offensive stuff. I'm not even going to repeat some of the stuff that she's said and that she's posted on social media, et cetera, over the years. How do you get rid of Tanya Granick-Allen and keep her?
I know.
There's something fundamentally not right about that. Who is advising Doug Ford in these areas?
Well, that's a very good question to which I do not have an answer.
You know what? Also, I want to, Nick, take a minute, while we're on the subject of the election, just before we go to break, just to mention that we're going to have a special edition of the Combat Zone on Thursday, June the 7th, which is election night. So same time from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. So we'll have our regular show on the Wednesday before, which is 2 weeks from tonight. But we're going to have a special edition, an election night edition on the 7th. Yeah. So make sure you mark your calendars, because we really are going to want to hear from you guys what your opinions are about the results of the election as they're coming in live.
Absolutely. We want to know what you think about the way things are going to shape up that night. So we'll be here. And I am, in one way, I'm a little nervous about it, because I think that every election we say the same thing. This is the most important election in our history. But I really think this is a watershed election, and it's going to shape Ontario for years to come. So I'm going to want to hear what people have to say about it.
Look, we're going to take a couple of minutes break. So put your feet up, listen to the music, and for Robert out there, we've put some better music into our breaks.
And don't
just
forget,
for you.
In the next half hour, we have Brian Greenwood with Walks for Veterans. He's on the line. We'll bring him on as soon as we get back. So you just stay right there. We'll be back with more after this.
Okay, welcome back to the Combat Zone. I'm going to have to memorize your introduction there, Nick, because I can't get it. So we're into second half hour. You know, I'm thinking about making this into like a football type of thing where we're now in the second quarter of the game, right? That was we just switched sides, right? And we could have a whole lot of fun with Nick and his favorite football team in the CFL, the Hamilton Tiger Cats.
Oski wee wee, buddy.
Yeah, we'll get into that not tonight, but there's a lot of movement there as well. So, but anyway, Nick, I'll let you take over because we've got a guest on here, and so why don't you go ahead?
Sure. Our guest this evening, is Brian Greenwood. He is with the in Ottawa, it's the first annual Canadian Walk for Veterans. I want to welcome him to the show. Brian, it's a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Nick. It was great to meet you this afternoon. It's great to.
Can you hear him?
I'm good. I can hear you.
Oh, there we are. Hey. So welcome to the Combat Zone, where we manage things on the fly. You remember that saying in the military, max flex?
There you go.
That's what this is all about. You just be flexible and get the job done. Anyway.
I was thinking more like FUBAR.
Well, there's that one too. We're just a bunch of Jaffos in the middle of a FUBAR. Anyway.
Yeah, we better not go into that.
I know. For those of you who know what that means, that's all that needs to be said. If you don't know, then we're not going to tell you.
Even though the internet is not regulated, this is still not an X-rated
That's
show.
right. It's not. This is a family-friendly show. We want to keep it that way. All right, so let me just go over the details. Well, actually, before I do that, Brian, could you take a moment and just explain for the listener who Brian Greenwood is and how you got involved in this project in the first place?
Well, I joined the military in 1980, and I am one of the few who had the privilege of being a professional musician in the Canadian Forces. And I started out as the trumpet player who played the last post on the cenotaph on television on November the 11th in the snow or the rain or sunshine, depending on what the weatherman brought along for us. And as I moved through my career in the military, I did the director of music course and was commissioned as an officer and became the officer in command or the conductor of the ceremonial guard band, which of course is on the hill doing the changing of the guard through the summer. Then I went to Edmonton as the commanding officer of the Royal Canadian Artillery Band, 3.5 great years there. And then I finished as the commanding officer of the Central Band here in Ottawa, the very band that I joined as a lowly corporal in 1980. And I retired in 2010. So just over 31 years, I guess, of service. And my wife is a veteran, Jill. She served for 17 years. She served in Africa. She served in Germany. And we come by this cause quite naturally because of that. We stepped into the role as sort of the team leads for this project, I guess about 2 months ago. And it seemed a natural for us because of our heritage in the military. And Jill is a singer and has done a fair bit of work as a singer for veterans. We seem to be inextricably connected to veterans. And so here we are looking after the Canadian Walk for Veterans. And it's a challenge, but it's a very rewarding challenge at the same time.
Yeah, I would imagine it would. And it sounds like, after that length of time, one of the things about the military in Canada, and I know that it's both a good thing and a bad, that once you're involved, you're always, in your heart at least, a member. Even if you're not getting paid by the military, you don't have the right to wear the uniform anymore. There's something that you gain when you put on the Queen's uniform and vow to defend the Queen and her heirs and assigns, and by extension the country, that it's I don't want to call it an elite club, but it's a unique one. And those bonds never really go away. And what I think what happens is as you begin to get older, after you've released, you begin to realize the size and scope of what you were involved in. Because let's face it, when you're 18, because you were in Cornwallis the same time I was in there in the summer of 1980 as well. And for all I know, you and I either jogged past each other. We might have even been in the same platoon. I don't know. My memory's not that good. But at any point, we weren't thinking about the greater scheme of things. We were thinking about the forced march we had to do the next day, or PT, or, NBCD drills, or cleaning the rifle, or whatever it was. We were involved in the moment of the day. It's only later that you reflect back and you realize, holy cow, what was I part of? And that is something that I think takes a long time to develop. So I can understand why you would want to get involved. Was there any particular event that kind of kicked it off for you to get involved in this particular thing, or was it just a general love of the military in the first place?
I think certainly both my wife and I are grateful and proud of our service, and I think that is the main reason we're doing this. I think we saw a need as well, because I think veterans in this country face a lot of issues, and I think we saw an opportunity here to draw together the Canadian population, all those wonderful people, moms and dads, brothers and sisters, and sort of draw them closer to these people that we call veterans. And, we see them march by on November the 11th. I go to the cenotaph every year with my medals on November the 11th with Jill. And we see them march past on the street, all these men and women who so bravely represented our country in such difficult circumstances. We clap our hands. Some of us get a little choked up. We realize the power and the dedication and the honor that's going past us on the street. And I think that's huge. That's really important. But I think it's true that we saw an opportunity here to take those people that we look up to and offer an opportunity for those who perhaps haven't been close to a veteran, who don't understand them, who may be a little afraid of them because they see them up on a pedestal. This is an opportunity to walk shoulder to shoulder with them, to sit and look them in the eye and talk to them and make a friend, and to realize that they're loving people.
You know something? I think that's part of it, is to make them human. I remember when I was still on terrestrial radio saying, when in the midst of the Afghan war, the silver lining in the war, and because war's ugly no matter which one you look at, they're all ugly, and each one brings its own kind of horror. But at the same time, there are also silver linings to be found in any catastrophe, and the war is no different. And that was that Canadians fell in love for the very first time in recent history with their military. And I remember saying to members of the military at the time, enjoy this while it lasts, because it won't last forever. People, as time goes by, people will, it's not that they'll lose interest, but they'll get back to their daily lives. The events that draw them to you now will fade in their memories. And, when as much as I hate to say this, when you don't have the highway of heroes every once in a while with a hearse down it so people can congregate and show their pride and respect to one of our fallen brethren, then, this is going to happen. So one of the things that attracted me to this, and by the way, I'm going to MC this event, and I want to thank you and your lovely wife for asking me to do that. It's an honor, and I'm certainly appreciative of it. But this walk, I really think that this is a way to kind of reconnect with the public, with members of the military, and to help foster that we may never get back to the midst of, let's say, in 2006, 7, and 8, when in those years when everybody was just crazy about the military because of the job they were doing and how well they did it and so on. Okay, but you have to have an undercurrent of respect, and this is an excellent way to do it.
Exactly. That's very well said. And it's an opportunity to connect with them just one-on-one in a very relaxed, enjoyable atmosphere, and to see the love and the joy in their eyes, and to hear their stories, and to, as I said, make a new friend. And I think there's no better way to tighten this country up, to bind it together, than to sit down and show each other some love.
Well, certainly some respect.
So that's
absolutely, and yeah. Now this is going on in 8 cities: Victoria, Vancouver, Edmonton, Ottawa, Kingston, Fredericton, Halifax, and St. John's. So you are the regional director for the Ottawa area, correct?
Yeah, actually, Jill and I are the team leads. They're calling us. I've been called a lot of things. That'll suffice. And we're sort of drawing together a team of people who are helping us set up various aspects of the walk, the route, the equipment, the sponsorship, advertising. All this stuff is part and parcel of the role that our committee is playing, and we're working tirelessly to get it ready. It's just over a week away, and we're pretty much ready to go and looking forward to it. So, yeah, a lot of work, but that's kind of what we've done. We pushed it along day by day by day.
My guest is Bill Greenwood, if you're just joining us. He is team lead for the Walk for Veterans here in Ottawa, coming on Sunday, June 3rd, 2018. The registration starts at 1:30 at the Walter Baker Park. It's $25 registration fee, and for that you'll get a commemorative coin and, of course, a chance to walk with a vet and talk to them and find out, what makes the military mind tick that's different than the civilian mind. And you'll get a chance to have a little peek inside there and get to know these people, because they're just like you and I are. They just have a different job, and they take that job very seriously. I will be the MC, as I mentioned, and I'm really looking forward to it.
It's going to be a great afternoon. We've got some vintage military vehicles coming, so you can have a look at those. There are going to be some exhibits. We're hoping to have some music there. There will be food, and yes, we'll have a little course mapped out. It'll be about 2.5 kilometers. You can walk it twice. You can run it twice. If you have mobility issues, you can just follow another path. There are all kinds of options. It's a beautiful spot, and I've spoken to the weatherman. He's promised me a beautiful day. So.
You've got more influence with him than I do.
Hey, Brian, it's Joseph Ben-Ami here. Welcome to the show. And sorry I didn't jump in there. I was dealing with a number of minor technical problems here,
like headphones. It didn't work.
We're just improvising as we go along. I have to say,
sometimes that's the best way.
Well, and we make things work here. So this is actually only our second live show, so we're still ironing out a few bugs here and there. I'm just interested in knowing now. Nick listed the cities that your organization is doing the walk in, and I'm just wondering, where can our listeners go to get specific information about individual cities, because we've talked a fair amount here about the details of what's happening in Ottawa, the location and the time, etc. So what about the other cities? Where can we get more information for those?
Best place to go online is to www.equitussociety.ca, and you'll see at the top of the page a little tab for the Canadian Walk for Veterans. And you can follow down that page, and you'll see buttons for all 8 of the walks. And you can just click on a button, and you'll get all the information and the opportunity to register. If you're in a city other than Ottawa, they're all there. You can register online, and it's all explained. If you go to our particular page, we have the map of the route. We have some sponsors there, and if you go to the other pages, I'm sure it's pretty much the same as that.
Yeah, who can I ask who are some of the sponsors? Because it might be kind of nice just to promote them to our listeners right now.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of sponsors, but we do have Loblaws has helped us out. And also locally, Wigney Homes and Renovations has stepped up and helped us out with a lot of equipment and site setup. 1% Realty is another sponsor. A company called Screen Print is another sponsor. We're also going to be raffling off 2 round tickets on Flair Airline to whatever locations they cover. So we have sponsorship from that small group of individuals. And, of course, we're still open to others who might want to step up and give us a hand with this.
And you have a Facebook page as well?
We do, yes. If you just go onto Facebook and type in the Canadian Walk for Veterans, it will take you to it.
Well, that's good. That's it. It's a great cause, and good for those of you in the community who stepped up to lend a hand and to help sponsor the events here in Ottawa, and for those organizations and individuals who've stepped forward in the various communities where you're holding the events across the country.
The other thing I want to mention, let's take the last few minutes of the interview here, Brian, if you don't mind. And because we have a pretty good handle on what's going on this year, given the fact that you want to build on this, what kind of have you given any thought to what next year might look like, or think about the larger picture? What would you like to see this evolve into?
Well, I'd like to see it become an entity unto itself. I'd like to see more of a national presence. We're in 8 cities now, but there are a lot of big cities in Canada that we're not in this year. I'd like to see that happen and people in those various locations to step up. Insofar as the city of Ottawa is concerned, we're looking at next year and the year after and considering major sponsorship, and we're talking about the date and also the location. We're in Canada this year. Walter Baker Park is a beautiful spot, lovely for a walk, but there are a lot of beautiful spots in Ottawa, so we're looking at several locations and different ideas. So we're open to, where the journey takes us, and we want it to grow to become a much more national event, something that is known across the country, something you almost don't have to tell anybody about. It just happens. It'll never be as popular as Christmas, but,
No.
It would be nice.
But so it'd be kind of like, and I don't want to put the two on the same level, but kind of like the Terry Fox one. You just mentioned, and everybody knows what you're talking about. The same thing with,
That's right.
Bikers for Dads and things, different things that become almost iconic. And let's face it, if the public doesn't embrace the military, then, the public really loses out, because it's such a vital part of who we are as Canadians. I love to share stories about our military history. I won't do it now, but the bottom line is that we have nothing to be ashamed of. We hold our head up with any nation on the planet, and many times we're way ahead. We always seem to be on the right side of the issue. We always seem to have the very best people on the planet doing things, and doing them, in heroic ways that just stagger the imagination and make Hollywood look like, if you look at films like Raiders of the Lost Ark, some of our heroes make that look like a Boy Scout camp. So
yes, that's right.
The one thing I would like to see part of this, and I have no say about it one way or the other, but is to help people understand the history behind the military and what propels people into it in the first place. That, I think, is a very...
Well, I think I think that's a very important comment, because I think it goes directly to who we are as Canadians. And, it's not just something to do for a paycheck. It's something well beyond that. And, if you look at I agree with you, if you look at the situations we've been in and out, the bravery, the stories that these veterans have, it blows Raiders of the Lost Ark right out of the water.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that it would be, I believe we need to connect these ideals, these wonderful traits that these people show, that have them step up and say, yes, I'm going to serve my country. We need to enrich all of our population. We need to expose them to those things so that they understand the commitment and they understand the sacrifice
and they
and
understand
the mindset.
why defending it is worthwhile.
That's right. What we have here is incredible. We are so privileged, and defending it is certainly worthwhile. Yes.
So that's
I agree.
So again, just to reiterate, that's Sunday, June 3rd. Registration starts at 1:30. It's $25.
Right.
And for that, you'll get now. Is that per person, or how does that fee break down?
It's per person. Yeah, $25 per person, and children under 12 are free.
Okay.
And and if you don't register online, we'll have a 3 or 4 registration tables set up. You can register right on the spot. and we'll be happy to see as many as we can.
Okay. Now, the money, of course, is going to go to help veterans in a variety of different programs and ways, right?
It is, yeah. It's going to go to the Equitas Society, and they are all about advocacy that will significantly probably influence policies and benefits and actions that are very much a part of a veteran's life.
Okay.
And so they are doing their best to even the playing field across the country, and insofar as helping those who have gone through some terribly unfortunate circumstances, who have faced tragedy, those who've lost their lives, their families, and those who've lost limbs and been affected so horribly by some terrible things. And this group of people is dedicated to advocacy on their behalf, and making sure that all of us, but particularly those who really need it, are treated fairly.
Well, Brian, I want to thank you very much for joining us this evening. I look forward to being there with you on the 3rd of June. It's an honor to be asked to participate, and it's one that I'm more than glad to help out with in any way that I can. I encourage all of our listeners, if you're in the Ottawa area or any of the other cities, by the way, and again, I'll just run them down: Victoria, Vancouver, Edmonton. I'm skipping Ottawa because you already know that. Kingston, Fredericton, Halifax, or St. John's. Go to this event. Get to know a vet.
And the website.
And the website is
equitassociety.ca.
Right. So if you want more details, and at that website, you can find out everything you need to know about the walk in your area. And please, if you have any interest at all, volunteer to help for next year. Be there. And don't be just somebody who signs the line and they never see you again. Put your shoulder to the wheel and help. If you can find a better, more worthy cause, when it comes to helping our vets. Because remember what our Prime Minister said. We don't have what you're asking for, which is a slap in the face to veterans. And this is one way where the population of the country, rather than its leadership, can say, he was wrong, and I'm here to prove it. Thank you very much, Brian. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to seeing you on the 3rd of June.
Thanks again for being on the show. Thank you, Joe. And don't be a stranger, Brian. Come on anytime.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
All right. Now, that pretty much wraps up the first hour of the show. And I really enjoyed that conversation with Brian. I had a chance to meet with him and his wife earlier this afternoon just to get to know them a little bit. And they're wonderful people. They're really dedicated to what they do. It's a passion for them. And if you want to enrich your own life, spend some time around people who are passionate about something, who have a burn or a desire to make a difference. And get around them, and you'll get infected with it. And that's a good kind of infection, believe me.
Right. And, Nick's a modest guy, so he's not going to toot his own horn, but I'm going to toot his horn for him. Nick's a former seaman, spent, 4 or 5 years in the Navy, Nick?
10.
10 years. Oh, I didn't realize it was that long.
Believe me, the Navy didn't realize it either.
So, good for Brian, good for you, Nick, and good for all of our servicemen and veterans out there, and servicewomen as well.
We appreciate your service.
Okay, we're coming close to a break, and a little bit longer, top of the hour. But before we go, we want to remind you of our toll-free number. If you want to call in and join the conversation, 844-415-2115. 844-415-2115. And after the break, we're going to get into a little bit of a discussion about healthcare and healthcare reform and why it is that we don't seem to be able to have a meaningful, serious discussion about the changes that are necessary, structural changes.
There's
that
several
are necessary
topics
to
that fit
improve
in that category, by the way, not just healthcare. All right, you stick around. We'll be right back with more after this.
Okay, welcome back to hour number 2 of the Combat Zone for May the 23rd, 2018.
Yep.
Did I get the date right? I'm
I
having
think-
so much trouble keeping track of
As
the
a
date
matter
the
of fact,
last week or
according
so.
to my very powerful computer here in my hand, which is more computing power than they landed Apollo on the moon with, otherwise known as cell phone, you're right. It's May 23rd.
Now, it's interesting you raised that because I remember we used to have one of these old 286s or 386s or whatever, and my wife would do her writing work on it, and it regularly ran out of memory space.
Yep.
And it was, the old DOS system, right? And so we decided that we would go out and we would invest in a top-of-the-line computer, like cutting-edge top-of-the-line. So we went out and we spent at the time, this is about 20 years ago.
Right.
So we went out and we bought top-of-the-line. We spent about $5,000. And when I was talking to the salesperson, I told them, I said, our biggest issue really is memory space because we keep on running out of memory. We're not really that interested in, games and all that stuff. And there weren't a whole lot of games that were available at that
the time.
time.
Anyway, yep.
So the salesman says to me, he says, I'll tell you, my friend, he says, there is 36 gigabytes of memory.
A whole 36 gigabytes.
36 gigabytes of memory in this computer. And he leans into me. He puts his hands on my shoulder. He says, in your life, you will never be able to fill up that memory.
Oh, my God. Yeah, how times have changed. I remember buying my first computer about the same time. And the salesman told me, he said, you could put all of Encyclopedia Britannica in this thing and still have plenty of space left over. Same kind of thing, right? People had no idea how fast technology was going to change or the kind of leap forward it was going to make in computing power. So when you look at, let's say, the Apollo program, a lot of that was done without the benefit of computers. It was all done in their head on a chalkboard or a slide rule.
A slide rule.
Slide rule.
Who even knows what a slide rule is these days?
Never mind, knows one. Knows one. Has anybody ever even seen one? Knows how to use it?
I know how to use one.
I know what they look like, but I don't know how to use them.
Well, I can't. I never mastered using them for every single kind of function, but
Right.
it was always what I was always fascinated by how, depending on how you lined up all of the lines,
Right.
That you could do so many different types of complicated calculations with it. I don't know it. Whoever came up with the slide rule was genius. Genius in capital letters, okay?
Because before that, who knows how you did things. But remember, in the days of Einstein, everything was done in your head on a blackboard. Think about him working out some of those formulas. Now, this is not the topic du jour that we're supposed to get into, but this is what happens when you do live radio. When you think about the progress we were able to get through, and because every move forward is built on the successes of the past, right? Like before you had the electric light bulb, first you had to have a method of creating electricity. And before you had electricity, you first had to come up with magnets. And you had to, everything's built one technology upon the other, like a bricks in a wall. You can't put the top brick on until you lay the first bottom brick. So as you go along, but the truth is that as technology advances, those advances come faster and faster and faster. And as much as we look at shows like Star Wars or Star Trek and look at some of the stuff that dazzles us and thinking, oh my God, this stuff is amazing, how much of it do we already live with? Look at the original Star Trek series, the tricorder, okay, or the personal the flip open phone communicate. I got one in my hand. It's called a cell phone. Okay, we now have wristbands that can monitor your health. What's the difference between that and a tricorder?
Well, as I like to call them, the Dick Tracy phone, because I don't know if you remember, as a kid, Dick Tracy had his little
phone in his wristwatch.
It was his wristwatch, and he had a little TV monitor in it, and he could talk, make video calls in his.
And that was back in the 1930s.
That was his Dick Tracy. Well, It was okay. Just want to clarify, guys. Nick
watched
and I,
the reruns.
Nick nor I grew up in the 1930s.
Yeah, we just watched the reruns.
Right,
But-
right. Oh man,
You're thinking the same thing I am. The shoe phone. Get smart.
get smart. No, that was later. I was thinking of Buster. Was it Buster Crab? What was the? Oh my goodness, I can't remember the name of the show. Brian Blessed played in it recently. Well, recently, I guess it's
What, a
probably
remake?
about. It was a remake of it.
You're not talking
Flash
about
Gordon.
Oh, Flash Gordon. You know when they did a movie out of that back in the 70s? And
I think it was a little
Max
later
von
than that,
Sydow
80s.
was Ming the Merciless. And Queen played the soundtrack. And it's the only reason I went to the movie because I'm a huge Queen fan. And Max von Sydow, he was the ultimate villain. I mean, he really had some fun with that. But even the stuff that happened, the idea of pulse laser weapons, what are the U.S. Navy playing with now? You know, rail guns and lasers.
Well, forget the U.S. Navy. What are the Chinese? What's the Chinese Navy playing with right
What
now?
are we
except for the
playing with?
pulse lasers, right?
1930s Bofors guns. Anyway.
Okay, look. Okay, our number to call is 844-415-2115.
Save us from ourselves.
We wanted to get into a little bit of talk about healthcare and healthcare reform and why we seem to not be able to have a serious conversation in this country about whatever structural changes, whatever fundamental changes we have to do in order to make our healthcare system not just more efficient, not just more cost effective, but more relevant to the consumers. Because let's face facts. Patients are consumers of healthcare. They are consumers.
Absolutely.
So, and that's not a dirty word. I just think it's a reality. So we're in the middle of an election campaign in Ontario, not physically the largest province, but certainly the most populous province in Canada, the most prosperous province in Canada.
It used to be.
And we can't have a serious conversation about healthcare reform. So what's up with that?
Well, first of all, what happens is you have a heavy union influence that is not interested in losing control over one of the most important aspects of our economy. Let's face it, the healthcare industry is massive. You've got a lot of union jobs tied up in that are heavily linked with the current government and depend on them to continue this idea of keeping this image, this myth of a one-tier healthcare system. But anybody with a brain understands that we don't have a one-tiered healthcare system. We have a two-tiered healthcare system. We have things like laser eye surgery. We have things like clinics where you can go and get minor day surgeries done. It won't be that far into the future, I don't think, where knee replacements. My wife just had one at a hospital. She was there for a day and a half. Okay, I can see the day coming when that's done in a clinic too. So if we're doing these in clinical settings, is there any reason to have the government, I don't want to say pay for things. I don't necessarily have a problem with a country deciding that they're going to pay towards making sure people can afford health care. I'm not cold-hearted. I'm not a libertarian. I'm not somebody who says, that's it. If you can't pay for it, you don't get it. Because I don't want to see anybody in the streets for want of health care. Okay? I don't want to see people go bankrupt because they can't afford it. But I don't think the government needs to be the only provider of health care, because that old saying goes, the government does nothing well and most things poorly. There's got to be a better way to do this, and we can't even have start that conversation.
Well, we are having a conversation about it a little bit provincially. We're not really talking about structural reform, but we are talking about piling on more services. So, both the Liberals and the NDP, I think the Liberals are promising it as well, but free dental care.
You name it.
Okay, so free dental care, and this is how you pay for it. Poof, magic, the money appears magically. Free pharmacare.
That's the first time I've heard that. Well done. Our own sound effects.
Yeah, I spent a little bit of time digging up some of these sound effects today.
Yeah.
So you like that?
Yeah, I do. There you go. That's the money fairy.
That's the money fairy. It's it's so detached from reality. First of all, nobody's clamoring for this. People are not wandering the streets with their teeth falling out because they can't afford dental care. And look, don't get me wrong. I have dental care. I don't have insurance. I do not qualify for insurance, nor does my wife, because we have a number of medical issues that makes us not coverable. And we don't have dental insurance, and we don't have pharmacy insurance. So we have to budget, and we pay our way. And we raised 4 children this way, and paid out of pocket for dental care. And yeah, it costs money, and it required some sacrifice for sure. We had to make budgetary decisions, as we have to do all along with everything. But the point I'm making here is that we don't have an epidemic of tooth decay, not because people can't afford dental care. If people don't brush their teeth or they don't floss, that's their business, right?
That's right.
So, who's really clamoring for free dental care in this province? I don't get it.
Well, I think what's going on here is the current government and its minions are looking for something that the population will grab onto and say, I'll vote for that, even though the population has no interest in any of these things. Because who do they offer pharmacare to? The kids just out of school, okay? The young 24, 25-year-olds and under.
But that's just brand new.
I know it is.
Since January?
Yeah. But the point is they're throwing it out there as part of the election platform. They also they've got this plan to have, they're running a test program of, what do they call it, where you're minimum income, where you don't even have to work. They'll just send you so much money every year. Okay, that's going on. There's 4,000 people in Ontario on that program. I forget the name of it, but you know what I'm talking about. Then they brought out the drug plan. So the drug plan covers the healthy people who don't need it. Okay, the socialized income for people. All they're telling them is you don't have to go out in the fields and work. We'll pay you just to sit on your butt and stay home. And a lot of people will do that because people are inherently lazy. And unless they're given a reason to get up and go out the door, I'm being broad in my perspective here, but a lot of people, too many people, don't have the sense of pride in themselves to go and earn their own way. It's easier to let somebody else foot the bill.
Yeah, I don't know, Nick. I don't know that I agree with you. I don't think that people are inherently lazy. I think that the real problem, and we're just straying a little bit off of healthcare, but I think this is an important subject that you've raised. The issue for me is not whether people are lazy. The issue for me is whether or not we're inducing a certain amount of mindset amongst younger people that says that they can't do it on their own, that they can't make ends meet, that they need the nanny state to look after them. And of course, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
So you create a situation where not only are you giving people that unnecessary assistance, if you will, and I'm not talking about the people who need help. There are people in society who need help, and I think we do a pretty good job of helping them. Maybe we could do a better job, but these are not the people I'm talking about. I'm talking about the massive people who can look after themselves. And what we're doing is we're teaching them, we're pounding them over and over again with the message that you really can't. You really can look after yourself. And I just want to say this, okay? All this talk about how, we have to have free dental care. I'm going, well, if we have to have free dental care, if there's a crisis out there that people are just, on the verge of dying because their teeth are falling out, try. You're laughing, Nick. This is not a laughing matter.
I just have this issue
Nick.
of people collecting their teeth as they walk down the street.
But if it's such a crisis, surely to goodness the crisis didn't just appear sometime in December 2017. If this is such a crisis, surely to goodness it was a crisis, I don't know, 12 months before and ought to have been put into the previous
It's
budget.
only a crisis because the government needs a crisis.
Well, that's it exactly. It's a manufactured crisis in order to convince people once more that if they don't have this benefit, that they are deprived, that they are set upon, that they're suffering terribly.
Life's not fair.
Life's not fair. And the real problem, sort of coming full circle, getting back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, is that inducing people, inculcating people with that mindset has consequences. What we're doing is we're creating a whole generation, and have created generations now, of young people who largely lack ambition, lack self-esteem, because, there's a show we could do, the self-esteem market, okay? Because we're so busy trying to pump up people with false self-esteem instead of letting them actually go out and succeed at doing something on their own.
This is something that, and I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson, and he's found that niche, and there's a vacuum, there's this hole in people's lives that's saying this can't be true. They might not articulate it that way. It gets expressed in all kinds of weird and contorted ways. There's all kinds of different movements that flow out of this that they're not buying this. You can't anymore, but they don't know what they can do. So they just fly all over the place trying to figure it out. Then somebody like Peterson comes along and say, wait a minute, here's what is really going on. This is what you need to do. And he's acting like a father to millions of children and telling them what life's all about and how to go about being successful in it. And they're eating it up. And this is, I think, the pendulum beginning to swing back the other way, is where people realize that they don't have to be held, they don't have to be held by the hand. At some point, when you're teaching your kid to ride a bike, if you hold on too long, they get frustrated. And they say, I can do it. Let go of me. I can do it. And he was the parent going, but you might get hurt. The government's going, but I need you to keep my programs alive. So they don't let go. And people get frustrated. And I think this is part of what makes the Peterson movement, if I can use that phrase, and other people like him. He's not the only one doing it, but he's the rising star at the moment, are telling people you don't have to buy what the government's selling. There is opportunity out there for you. There is a way where you can go and develop that self-respect that you're lacking, because insecurity comes from a sense of lack of self-respect. And when you don't have anything in your life that you can sink your teeth into, it's really hard to respect yourself. And too many kids, and when I say kids, I'm talking like from 30 under, they wander around lost because no one's ever said it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to take a risk. If you fall down and hurt yourself, learn from it and don't repeat that mistake, but go out and try again. It's the bubble wrap mentality coming unglued.
The snowflake generation.
Absolutely. But snowflakes melt and turn into water. And sooner or later, that water gathers into a river.
So getting back to healthcare.
Yes.
I want to have a serious conversation about healthcare reform. I do not understand. Okay, so I already said enough about I don't understand why we can't have that conversation. So let's start having that conversation now, even if it's just you and me, Nick.
Okay.
The first thing I would say with healthcare reform is that you can separate the insurance aspect from the delivery of service.
Mm-hmm.
That you don't actually have to own hospitals and run hospitals in order to control or in order to own the insurance system. So just as a starting point, whether you agree with a publicly owned and operated insurance system, let's at least agree that you can separate those two issues.
I got no problem with that.
Okay. So we could have a universal health insurance system like we have now, and I think that there are significant problems with it, just the insurance aspect, but let's assume that we could just take that, package it up, and leave it the way it is. We can have universal health care coverage without having universal ownership, state ownership of hospitals and state control over the delivery of services. So this is what I would propose as the first thing to talk about.
Okay.
Is privatize hospitals, privatize the delivery of services, okay, and maintain and fine-tune and even improve the universal health insurance program.
So that is the system's run by the private sector, but is paid for through the public purse.
Just like car insurance,
Mm-hmm.
the car insurance companies don't own the car dealerships. They don't own the car repair shops.
Mm-hmm.
They don't own the auto industry. And speaking about the auto industry, what makes us think that the government is better qualified to run healthcare than it's qualified to run the auto industry or the steel industry or the lumber industry? The fact is that the government is no more qualified to run hospitals than any of these than they are to run any other area of the.
You know what I would like to see? One of the things, because I've often wondered, now, by all accounts, Alex Munter, who is a name we haven't heard from, and for those of you listening in other parts of the country, Alex Munter is a former councillor here in the city of Ottawa who ended up running a local was it CHEO, or did he run a LIN, a local health initiative network?
I think he's the CEO or the chair of the chair of the board of the Children's Hospital.
Okay, so let's say I think you're right. And by all accounts, he seems to be doing a pretty good job, but that wasn't because he was the best qualified. I think they got lucky. I would rather see, because one thing, I've had more than one doctor tell me, the last thing you want is doctors running hospitals. Look, if you need to come and have a valve replaced in your heart, come and see me. If you need to balance the books, that's not my forte. I didn't take accounting in medical school. So why not have universities offer medical accounting and have people trained to run these things so they lift that burden off the surgeons and off the doctors so they can do what they were trained to do.
Well, they do. Universities do offer this. It's health administration.
I had no idea.
Yeah, you can get a degree in this area. I have some friends actually who actually do have degrees in this area.
So why aren't they running hospitals?
Well, they do, but they run it in Ontario. Or actually, my friends who do this, I have a few friends who are in this, and they're actually in senior management positions in hospitals down in the United States. Okay. But these guys with this education do run hospitals here in Ontario. But the mindset is very different, okay? Because when the government owns the hospital, you start off with a certain budget, okay?
Right. Yep.
You have X number of mixed millions of dollars, let's say, allocated to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And even though patients come in and as you treat patients, whatever the procedure is or the test that you're doing, that you bill the government for those procedures, okay, even then, because there's no real connection between the cost of the procedure and the amount that the government is paying, when a patient walks into a hospital with a fixed budget to start with, every patient that walks in that you treat is actually a loss. It's a charge against that budget. So what we should do maybe is let's pause here.
Okay.
And let's pick it up again after. We're going to take another short break, bottom of the hour. And we'll pick up the conversation afterward. Okay, we're heading into the home stretch here in the combat zone and the final quarter.
That's right. The final half.
Final quarter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Nick, come on, man. We've been at it now for an hour and a half.
Time show flies when you're having fun. The old saying used to be "time show flies when you miticize," but that's a muffler commercial. Remember that?
Time sure
flies when you miticize.
I don't remember that.
Yeah,
I remember the Fram oil commercial.
Which one was that?
Where you can pay me now or you can pay me later.
And the car going into the crusher.
No, he was pulling out. He was taking the engine block out.
Okay.
And he had one of those pull block and chain, block and tackle, right?
Yeah.
And he's going, told him he had to change the air filter or the oil filter, but he wouldn't listen to me, and that was the line was he said, you can pay me now, and then he gives a yank on the chain, and then the engine
starts to come out, or you can pay me later. Guess which one is more expensive? Oh, old commercials, man! I'll tell you. You look back on them now, and you just laugh. There was Canadian Tire ran probably the worst commercial ever in automotive repair history, and they said, "We're not going to give your car back until it's ready." And then a mechanic would lean out of the shop and go, "It's not ready yet." And people reacted by saying, "I am not taking my car to a shop where it's not ready yet." And it blew up in their faces. Now, I love Canadian Tire. It's a great Canadian success story. But marketing campaigns, everybody's going to blow one once in a while.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right. So let's get back into this healthcare discussion, because I want to kind of finish off some of the points that I was trying to make earlier. And I'm not sure exactly where we left off, but I was kind of talking about how when you start off with the hospital is owned by the state, by the province, by the government, and the government sets a budget, and every patient that walks in the door is a net drain on that budget. It's a charge against the budget,
right?
Okay, and yes, the hospital gets to, or the government pays a fee for whatever the service that the patient is getting from the hospital, but it doesn't really cover all of the costs and the administration of the hospital, etc. So when a patient comes in the door, the incentive is to have fewer patients and to get them out the door as fast as possible. Because the more patients you have and the longer they're there,
the more it costs you.
The more it costs you, the more it's a charge against your budget. And eventually, you run into a situation where you're running out of money, and then you have a hospital with a whole waiting list of patients for treatment that has to start closing beds, closing down operating rooms, because they don't want the patients to come in because they can't afford to treat them, because they're going to run into budgetary problems.
Which is exactly the opposite of the way it would work in the private sector.
Well, and, you and I have spent enough time in the United States. I'm not defending their healthcare system. They have problems.
Yep.
We have problems.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has problems. There's no perfect solution, okay? But one thing I will tell you this, is that in private hospitals in the United States, which is the majority of them, the vast majority of them, they want patients. And when you spend, you can't spend an hour down south of the border and have the radio on without hearing a few commercials for hospitals advertising for patients to come to them. So, and why is that? Because they're not getting subsidies from the government. The patient is their source of revenue.
Right.
So they want patients. And when patients come in, they want the patient to stay. They want the patient to have a good experience so that he or she is going to speak highly of the hospital.
Same
so
as
that
any
they
other
get
service.
More. It's now, I know people, it drives them crazy in this country when they think, oh, we can't do that. And I just, for the life of me, can't wrap my mind around why not. Well, why don't we allow people?
Here's what I think the answer is. You run into people who will tell you anecdotal horror stories about people who went in to have a baby and have now lost their house trying to pay for the delivery and all that sort of thing. Somebody goes in for a broken arm, costs them $15,000. And those stories may very well be real. But what they neglect to mention is that the vast majority of Americans have, through their employment, health care plans that cover them. And those who don't have it are usually young and healthy and don't want it because they don't need it, so they don't want to pay for it. So these stories that you hear about are fantastic. I mean, and when I say fantastic, I don't mean in a good way. I mean, they're horrific. But look, you could sit here all day long and have somebody tell you a horror story and then the other guy beside him tell you a fantastic story. The truth is somewhere in the middle. And I totally agree with you that this is a kind of a conversation we say, okay, let's set the rhetoric aside. Let's set the anecdotal stuff aside and just ask ourselves what's different between health care and car insurance. Both are services that you need. Now, somebody will say, well, your health is more important than your car. Fair enough. Okay. But from a consumer's point of view, it's a service. And if you want the best service, then you have to have the best program. The best programs come when there's some competition, people competing for your business, in this case, like a hospital or a healthcare program. And then they get into the argument, well, those evil insurance companies never want to pay for anything. Well, no, that's not quite true because, people would just give up on it if that was the case. What you have is a lot of fraud, and these insurance companies are trying not to get ripped off. It's there's an argument made on either side. And that's why whenever you try to raise the issue in Canada of even talking about adding to, or thinking about, never mind doing, just thinking about doing something with healthcare in this province or in this country, they just have a cow because they remember all the horror stories. They never hear about all the great things that happen. Like if you have what's one of the best clinics in the world for cancer treatment? It's the Mayo Clinic. Where is it? It's in the United States.
Well, I as you know, I have children and grandchildren living in the United States. And I'm telling you, we visit them regularly, and every hour listening to the radio, there's got to be a dozen advertisements for private cancer clinics. Mm-hmm. They want people to come. Now, I want to go back to what you were saying about the stories you hear, horror stories of people losing their houses and stuff like that.
Right.
And you're right, you do hear that.
Yep.
But the very fact that you hear about them from time to time is an indication of how rare it is.
That's true, because otherwise...
Because there is no epidemic of people losing their houses in the United States because of healthcare issues and or healthcare costs. And when it happens, it almost invariably has other factors involved. Okay? For instance, I had a hospital bill that I didn't pay, and I didn't talk to them. And they called, and they sent registered mail, and they sent it to collection, and I ignored them for 6 months. Well, look, man, if you're going to do that,
don't be surprised.
You're going to have someday somebody's going to be coming and nailing an eviction notice, a repossession notice for your house. Or whatever other property you own. That's just the way of the world. But if you deal with it and you go to the hospital and you make arrangements to make payments, okay, and get health insurance, okay, that's the first thing.
Of course.
Get it when you're young and you're healthy, because it's harder to get. It's harder to get when you're older and you're not so healthy. It's going to be a lot more expensive, and it's going to be hard to get. Period. So you're far better off. It's like life insurance, right?
Yeah.
Why do you buy life insurance for your children when they're young children? You don't buy because you're afraid that they're going to die and you want to get the benefit. You buy the insurance, Nick, because that way your children are insured already and they can play around with their insurance policies, but if you wait until they're 25, if they're adults and then they go and try to get it, they're going to pay a lot more.
Right.
And,
The
God
payout won't
forbid,
be the
they
same.
might have had some kind of a condition where they may not even be able to get life insurance. So you have to be responsible. So, I would tell people in the States to get insurance. I tell my kids, make sure you get insurance. It's expensive. I get it. So you can't have 3 cars. You have to have 1 car. I don't understand why you can't get by with 1 car. It's difficult. Yes, it's difficult. But those are the decisions you make.
That's right.
Right? It's like buying a house. Right? I'm going to pay a mortgage. My mortgage is not going to be as much as my health insurance is. Right?
Well, one of the things that I remember is, I'll say it has to be 8 or 10 years ago when Lowell was still on terrestrial radio here in the Ottawa Valley. For those of you listening from out of province, if you don't know Lowell, he's the local legend when it comes to talk radio.
Right, Lowell Green.
Lowell Green, yes.
Right. Not Lauren Green.
Not Lauren Green.
Oh, my goodness. If you'd call him up on the radio and called him Lauren Green, he did not appreciate it.
No.
Which is funny, because let me just say this. Lauren Green was also from Ottawa.
And he started out in radio.
In radio, absolutely.
That's right.
So
they have common roots.
It wasn't a stretch to confuse Lauren Green and Lowell Green.
Right. Although Lauren's now no longer with us, Lowell still is. Anyway, there was a case. It was this young little boy called Aiden. Now, maybe, Joe, you remember this. But Aiden needed some kind of throat surgery or something like that to save his life. And that surgery simply wasn't available here in Canada. Now, Canadians take great pride in their health care. As a matter of fact, if you do a survey to ask what Canadians are most proud of, healthcare is in the top 1 or 2, okay, usually at the top. But our healthcare, when you compare it to other regions around the world, isn't 1 or 2.
Yeah, it's actually, I think the OECD did a study in recent years, and the Canadian healthcare system ranked against healthcare systems in other developed countries somewhere around 32nd or 33rd or 34th.
It's a long way down.
It was only 1 ahead or 2 ahead of the American healthcare system for all of the problems that we think. I like to say, Nick, that the people who think we have the best healthcare system in the world there are only 2 people, okay? Yeah. 2 kinds of people. They are people who have not had a great deal of experience in the healthcare system,
right?
Number 1. Or they're people who have had no experience of healthcare systems in the country that they came
other
from.
Than Canada.
So, and look, I let me just say this, okay? In fairness, I'm trashing the healthcare system, but it's not bad. I mean, for certain things, like for catastrophic, acute illnesses and that, you go to the hospital, you don't worry. I had a heart attack, how am I going to pay for treatment? Okay. Yeah. So there are good things. There's no question about it. Yeah. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but there are some serious problems as well, and the trends are not very good, and we really have to do something. But I'm going to let you get back to your story about Aiden.
Okay, so anyway, the surgery wasn't available here in Canada, and Lowell was having a fit. And he started out the show. He was on from 9 till noon. And he told the story and was in tears telling the story. And Lowell's not easily emotional. That's not the kind of guy that he is. And he says, damn it, I got $20. And he slammed a $20 bill down on the table. I'm going to help this kid. Are you going to help me help this kid? And they raised, in 3 days, $100,000. They brought money in by the basket. People were dropping 20s and 50s and 100s off at the front desk. I remember I was there at the station, and they would bring baskets of money. And they would sit there counting it all. They raised $100,000 and sent him to a hospital in Cincinnati or Columbus. It was in Ohio. Sent him down there, and the kid got his life-saving surgery. But the point of the story is, as good as our healthcare system is, we had to go outside the country to save this little boy's life.
Right, and OHIP
wouldn't pay for it,
which is the Ontario Health Insurance Plan, wouldn't pay for it.
Right. There's another classic case, if you want to tell horror stories. This woman was pleading with, I think it was Dalton McGuinty, to cover her drugs. They were $6,000 a month. Critically ill woman. And they took her off the list because it was too expensive. Talk about equal access to health care. You're right. They were rationing the health care. They wouldn't cover her absolute life. How expensive these things were. A lot of people blame the drug companies. But wait a minute. How much did it cost to research those drugs? How much did it cost to bring them to market? How many years in development were they? I mean, there's a reason why those drugs cost that kind of money. It's not the drug company's fault, especially when the government is supposed to be footing the bill. So she ended up dying without ever getting any help from the government. That's not what I call, what do they call it, universal health care. That's nothing but health rationing.
Right, and that's what you end up doing. We know from experience in this country that wage and price controls don't work. So why do we think that if you own the healthcare delivery system, if you own the hospitals, and you dictate the prices that you're going to pay for the services, and you don't allow any kind of extra billing, that you force doctors to take whatever you're going to pay.
That's right.
Okay, and that's the law in Ontario. What makes you think that that's not going to drive prices up? Of course it is, especially because people don't pay healthcare premiums anymore in this province, which they used to. You used to, for public health, for your health insurance plan, the OHIP plan, you used to have to pay as a family who had a quarterly fee, and as an individual you had a quarterly fee, and you had to pay your premium. Every 3 months you had to pay it, okay, and you got coverage. And by the way, if you didn't pay your fee, you lost your coverage. And if you went to the doctor and you didn't have your coverage, you had to pay out of pocket. Now, you could pay your fee up to date and you could submit for reimbursement, but this is the kind of thing that was going on. But we changed all of that under the government of the Liberal government of Ontario of David Peterson, who introduced the Ontario Employer Health Tax, which was a payroll tax.
Right.
So now consumers didn't have to pay premiums. There was no chance of extra billing. There are no deductibles. So what you've done is you've completely separated the consumer from the cost of his or her consumption.
Right. Which means now they have a shopping cart mentality.
It's now there's unlimited demand. There's no market check on demand. Okay? So you have unlimited demand. The prices start going up. The cost of healthcare starts to go up. So what's your answer? Your answer is stomp down on spending. And it's a very simplistic answer because what ends up happening is the law of economics works in the healthcare system just as much as it works anywhere else.
Right.
And if you have higher demand,
the prices
and
go
you're
up.
controlling, but you're limiting the service, so you're creating more scarcity in economic language, and that itself is what drives the prices up.
Well, there's the other thing about this, the other side of the sword, because this thing cuts twice. Not only do you make it more expensive, but one of the problems people have in this province is finding a general practitioner. You know why? Because nobody's going to medical school to be one. There's way too much paperwork. They don't make enough money for the amount of work that they do. Doctors are retiring. My family physician, who I've had for almost 20 years, is going to retire next summer. You know, what are the chances that I'm going to be able to find another family doctor in the Barry's Bay area? I don't know. Maybe I'll get lucky. Maybe I won't. I don't know. There are a few. They've attracted one or two. So now you have this competition for doctors amongst municipalities trying to attract them to their areas to soften this GP shortage. But the real problem is there's no money in being a GP anymore. They've taken not only the joy out of it, like people get into medicine, not to fill out government forms. They actually want to help people. They have a very compassionate nature. They want to spend time with the patient. They want to get to know them, get to understand what their needs and wants and concerns are. But now when you go to a doctor, somebody was telling, I don't know if this is true or not, but somebody was saying they can only talk to you about one or two issues at a time. Let's say you've got a bad shoulder, a throat infection, and your knee needs replacing. You got to pick which two things you're going to talk about, because he doesn't have time and he can't bill for the third thing. So he says, well, we'll talk about that other one next time. But it's affecting me right now.
Or come back.
Yeah, or come back. But the point I'm making is, when you make a job so onerous, it gets to the point that no amount of money is worth it. And I have a personal family friend of ours who is a physician. She doesn't have a practice anymore. She's an emergency room doctor, great doctor. But she got out of her practice because the paperwork was unbelievable. She said, I spent more hours a day filling out paperwork than I did seeing patients. That's not what I got into medicine for.
And look, I believe that doctors should just be free to operate the way they want to operate their offices. They should be allowed to charge whatever they want to charge.
Yep.
And if you want to set a reimbursement price for certain services, you put a cap on what the insurance plan is going to pay.
Right. And you pay the difference.
Then fine. And let the patient decide if they want to pay the extra.
Or find a doctor who will...
and that's what's going to happen. What will happen is, because people want to know what's the right price. The right price for any product
is what
people want to pay for the product.
Precisely.
That's it. There's no special formula. There's no magic. So, look, if OHIP is going to pay the doctor, and I'm just pulling this number out of the air, $30 for a visit, and the doctor wants to charge $40, so charge $40, and I take that bill, $40, and I send it. This is the way it used to work, by the way.
Yeah.
I'd send that $40 bill and proof of payment. They'd send me back the $30. So in essence, the deductible, if you want to call it a deductible, was $10.
Right.
If I didn't want to pay that $10, I'd go see another doctor. And the market worked itself out, because if nobody wants to pay the extra $10 to see the doctor, then the doctor's not going to charge the $10.
Right. The price automatically has to fall.
So you don't have to regulate it. It regulates itself. So I say this, okay? Privatize healthcare, start to finish. Keep the public insurance side of it. Mm-hmm. I think that there are things that have to be worked out about that. But as a start, keep universal healthcare coverage and privatize the delivery of healthcare top to bottom, start to finish, end to end.
So in other words, make the car but don't run the dealership.
Don't even make the car.
Okay, fine.
Right? Run the insurance program. That's it. Just run the insurance program and get out of the business of owning hospitals. And don't tell me that profit is a bad thing, because I have news for you, okay? If a hospital is a not-for-profit, believe me, those directors on the board are making a healthy salary, irrespective of whether you call it profit or not profit. Okay? Nobody should be deceived into thinking that profit is different from collecting your salary, a large salary, in a not-for-profit.
Yeah.
Okay? The only difference is that if you're collecting it as profit, you actually have to be running the organization well.
That and you have to pay taxes on it.
Right. And you pay taxes on it. Well, you pay taxes on the profit
as well.
That's true,
too. Now, in the last couple of minutes of the show, we should talk about next week.
Yeah. So
next week.
Right. Next week is a regular show.
Wednesday. When that night, we'll be taking your phone calls and asking you to predict what you think is going to happen, because by then we're down. Or no, I shouldn't say next week. It's a regular show. It's the week after, I'm thinking of, on June the 6th.
Right.
The June the 6th show will be the one.
Show. The night before the election.
Right. Where we'll be asking for what you think the results will be, because by then it's all over but the crying. So we'll do that show that night, and June the 7th, during the election, we will host a live
special edition
show on election night, so that we can get your reaction as the results come in, and we can talk about the consequences, the ramifications, what this means for the future, who won, who lost, and why. Just break it all down for you and get your input. There's going to be a lot of crying in a lot of different camps. I just don't know which ones they are yet, because at this point, now Nick Nanos is coming out with a poll tomorrow, and of all the pollsters out there, he is one of the most accurate. So it'll be very interesting to see what he has to say tomorrow about what he thinks is going to happen in the next 2 weeks during the campaign.
It will be very interesting.
That it will be.
Nick, great 2 hours, and for those of you guys who were trying to get us on Facebook Live again, I don't know what happened, but we're going to get to the bottom of those technical issues, I promise you. So just keep on being patient. But great show, great debate, and look forward to getting together again next week in the Combat Zone.